Start of part 2. Is the US alliance the best defence for Australia?
Line of suckholes. But ladies and gentlemen, by appointing Bob Carr, the Gillard government edged ahead, I think, even of the Hawke government as the most pro-American Labor administration since war drove John Curtin to turn to Washington, as he said, without any inhibitions, free of any pangs. That was, of course, in the face of strategic disaster following the most significant time in our history until now, when Australia refused for decades to defend itself. Now, free riding on the US is a defence strategy that a large proportion of the world subscribes to. So why should Australia not stick with it as a national defence strategy? In Australia, think of all the pink bats and school halls and offshore processing facilities we can build if we just keep running down the defence boat. And governments will say the US will always be there to defend us because we are important to the US, and they always say such nice things about us and about our soldiers. So the biggest danger in believing that the US alliance is our best defence lies not with the US itself. It does not lie in the somewhat vague fear of an emerging power such as China, or in the impact that extreme instability in the Middle East might have on our prosperity. Ladies and gentlemen, it lies with us. By saying that the US alliance is our best defence, we allow ourselves to not take our defence seriously. The US alliance is not our best defence. We are our best defence. If Australia continues to underfund its own defence, but covers up the strategic risk by saying or implying that the US will always be there, we are making policy from a strategy-free vantage point. We're lying to ourselves. Remember, we tried this dumb approach with another great and powerful friend in the 1930s, and they dumped on us in 1941 and 1942. So let's not be so stupid again as we face a period of strategic uncertainty, unprecedented since at least the early 70s and probably since World War II. Australia's best defence will always be based on sovereign Australian power, which would take no more than a sustained spend of 2% of our GDP, would give us the ability to act unilaterally when we need to, and to contribute to like-minded alliances when it's in our interests. Imagine being able to say to our good friends the US, when they invite us to the next war, that we will consider it from our strategic interests and not because we need to curry favour. Ladies and gentlemen, the US alliance is not our best defence.
Retired Major General Jim Molan and US Ambassador to Australia Jeffrey Bleish. On RN and online at abc.net.au, this is Big Ideas. Paul Barclay with you. And now, joining Jeffrey Bleish and Jim Molan for an extended Q&A session, we have Catherine Ziesing, a leading thinker and writer on defence and strategic issues. She is the editor of the Australian Defence Force magazine. And Professor Zhu Feng, Deputy Director of the Centre for International and Strategic Studies at Peking University. Let's now return to the recital hall in Sydney for highlights of an intelligence squared debate that the US alliance is our best defence. Your moderator is Simon Longstaff, Executive Director of the St James Ethics Centre.
A couple of questions to Ambassador Bleish. Why is it that you say we're not being threatened by any kind of power, and you're here to help us with asymmetrical warfare, terrorism, piracy, cyber challenge and intelligence, and yet the Pentagon has a plan, and even now it seems to me that they have a war plan to contain China. Why is it that we have all the heavy lifting equipment that you do in Australia, and we continue to persist with war games that have nothing to do with the sort of things you're mentioning?
Yes, Nick Beams from the World Socialist website. Ambassador Blake, I draw your attention to the fact that during Kevin Rudd's first term as Prime Minister, President Obama twice cancelled visit to Australia, only making a visit after Rudd had been removed. It is now known at that time that the United States was hostile to Rudd's concept of an Asia-Pacific community in which the United States would have to make some accommodation to China's aspirations for greater influence in the region in order to try to head off a situation analogous to that which developed between Britain and Germany prior to World War I. And Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski, both of whom, of course, you know, refer to the China-US situation in that context. Following Rudd's removal by Labor factional bosses, some of whom were described in official cables made available by WikiLeaks as protected sources of the US Embassy, Obama then did come to Australia. He took the unprecedented decision to unveil a major shift in US foreign policy, the pivot to Asia, not from the Rose Garden at the White House or in an address to the US Congress, but in a speech delivered from the floor of the Australian Parliament.
Okay.
It's very clear that the pivot is
That's your
directed...
time. That's your time up.
Just let me finish.
Well, no, you get a minute.
Is directed against China, and given the proclivity for, and endangers the population of Australia and the world with war, given the proclivity of the US...
Well done, thank you.
That's called censorship, you assholes, anti-ABC.
That the US Embassy had nothing to do...
Okay, you've had your minute. There's an important thing about this House, and I'm going to let you respond immediately to that, is that the audience is rather intolerant of people who take more than their time, whether they're here or there. Ambassador Blythe, you might want to respond to that part of the question.
Well, can I respond to both
yeah,
Rich's
okay,
questions?
yeah.
So Rich, first on the issue of Pentagon's got a plan to contain China. We don't, and I don't know where you're getting your information from, but that's not America's approach. And if you just look at what we're doing in the region, it's not about that at all. Secondly, if you want to look at the what you described as war games, precisely what the most recent exercise was here. Our exercises involved things like humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. It had to do with breaking up a strife in a particular region where you have a scarcity, shortage, and people are raiding to try and get those resources. Precisely the sorts of things that I was describing. And working together to make sure that our cyber security systems are secure and that we can communicate with each other, notwithstanding hacking attempts or attempts to exploit weaknesses in cyber. So it's precisely the sort of things that I said we were doing, and if you just look at what we actually do in the world as opposed to what people like to suspect we're doing, what you'd find is that we're actually being entirely true to our word. Now, with respect to the statement that the President of the United States cleverly arranged for the Senate to hold off to the very last minute any vote on health care so that he wouldn't be able to come out here and visit with Prime Minister Rudd.
That's real power, isn't it?
Yeah, and then later on, he brilliantly ensured that you would have the Deepwater Horizon oil spill with the images of oil coming up every single day so that he wouldn't have to fly here to visit with Prime Minister Rudd. You know, it's not true. The president was anxious to get out here. It was one of the first visits that he scheduled. He had two reasons why he couldn't come out. That came up at the last minute. Literally, I got the call the night that he was supposed to be flying out, saying, I just can't leave because of the Deepwater Horizon spill. In terms of during his first term, Prime Minister Rudd's agenda on the Asia-Pacific community, we supported that. We thought it was a great idea, and we have supported the East Asia Summit. We have joined we signed the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation for ASEAN. We have gotten involved in the East Asia Summit so that all the parties in the region would be in one organization together and we could work through any dispute, whether it was an economic one or a security dispute, together. So that's the, you know, that is the truth. Those are the facts.
My name is Sam Murray. I'm a student at the University of Sydney, and my question is for the Major General. I understood and think the argument regarding free riding is compelling, that if against the conventional military threat of, say, invasion, that the United States might not come to our defense. So my question is threefold. Firstly, do we actually face any conventional military threats like Imperial Japan in the 1930s? If we do, who are they from? And does the free riding argument actually work against the asymmetrical threats that Australia faces in the modern world, like with respect to failed states, terrorism, international crime networks, like maritime security? So with respect to everything that Catherine told us about what the United States is doing for us in combating those threats, Can we objectively rely on the United States, considering how much help they've been to us with respect to actual realistic threats in the modern day? Thank you.
Sam, I spoke about the free ride, and the analyst who spoke about it when he was talking about the free ride essentially was saying that we can afford to spend less on our defence because the US is spending more. Therefore, we don't have to have a balanced defence force. We don't have to have a defence force which works within itself, because that becomes expensive. We can continue to send our Air Force to work with the American Air Force and our ground forces to work under the American ground forces, etc., etc. So that's, I think, what free ride means. It doesn't apply necessarily to conventional or to non-conventional threats to Australia. I don't think that in the foreseeable future we face invasion. I know a lot of people talk about it, but I think that at the moment it would take many, many years for any country to have the ability to invade Australia, and it would be quite out of context to do it. Therefore, who is likely to do it, I think, is irrelevant, and being asymmetric or non-asymmetric, I think, is also irrelevant. What is irrelevant is that none of us can predict the future. We don't know what's going to happen. Therefore, you've got to make a judgment as to what your Defence Force can do in the first instance. In a lot of ways, that's decided by what you can afford, and then you get into contingency planning. I just don't think that the basis of a good relationship and a good friendship is based on free riding.
Jim, can I ask you, if we were having this debate in Japan tonight, would the US alliance be their best defence? Because I was amazed in some senses that we had this very benign world being pictured. I think if we'd been in Manila or if we'd been in Tokyo tonight, they'd be talking about China, for example, and say, actually, this is pretty serious for us, the way they're talking. So would it make more sense for the Japanese?
That's a very good point. And I'd suggest to you that the Japanese, although they spend a relatively small amount of their GDP on defence, have produced a defence force, the parts of which that are relevant to the strategic environment in which they work, essentially their Air Force, anti-ballistic missile defence, and their Navy, is pretty good. I'd suggest to you that they aren't free riding, therefore they can go into an alliance.
And I'll come to you about this in a moment, Professor Zhu, but Catherine, you seem to suggest, you did mention a bit of maritime insecurity at risk in the Indian Ocean, but I got the sense that you don't think that the situation in the South China Sea is particularly troubling. Is that right?
It is troubling to some extent, in that the plan that China has put forward in where it would like to exercise its sovereignty, the first, second and third island chains where they would like to be able to exercise their power freely. I don't think Japan is terribly impressed because they are in the second island chain and they consider themselves a sovereign nation, and so they should. How China manages their power projection into that region is a huge issue for Japan. They have balanced their force according to their geographic and political circumstances. Australia has done the same. In many respects, we're very lucky. Our geography protects us from many of the issues that are arising in our region at the moment. Japan does not have that luxury. And Jim, you spoke of a balanced force for Australia. What does a balanced force look like for us?
If I can, Kath asked me a question. A balanced force looks very much like the force that was agreed by Kevin Rudd in 2009 but not funded by Kevin Rudd in 2009. It looks very much like the force that was called Force 2030, and we're kind of sticking with a Force 2030 force structure, but we're not funding it. Therefore, we are not balanced in any way, shape or form. And I can't look into the future and see when we will have a balanced force.
And just before I go back to the President, to be clear, are you saying you accept Professor Zhu's assertion that China is not really to be worried about, that it's going to be pretty benign, or do you look at China as one of the potential actors in this area that we should be thinking about seriously as potentially projecting power in a way that could be threatening?
Its economic power is growing, and with that comes its ability to flex its diplomatic and its security powers. As a sovereign nation, it does have that right. But when it comes to putting their views onto another sovereign nation through force, that is what I have issue with. By all means, sort out the territorial disputes as you will, but please leave loss of life out of it.
I'd like to weigh in on that. Our view about China is that it's as it becomes economically stronger, so will its military force. That's natural. That's what happens with every nation. We think that's appropriate. One of the important things is that as nations rise in this region, because China will not be the only country that does that, as nations rise in this region, we have to be working together. We have to be doing exercises together. We have to recognize common threats, and we have to be very transparent about both our intentions and our capabilities with one another. That's been our message to everyone in the region, including China. And we don't see China's growing military strength as a threat. We see it as an opportunity to address some of the common issues that we all recognize here, the ones that I mentioned earlier. And so when we do our trainings, we're training with not just Australia and Philippines and South Korea and Thailand and Japan, our allies. We train with others as well, because our goal is to be interoperable, to understand each other, to avoid misunderstandings. And we don't see a threat, we see an opportunity.
So you must be feeling pretty comforted now. I mean, all this thing about bases around you and 9 sets of armies and things, do you now look at those and say, well, perhaps they're not quite the problem you thought them to be?
Yeah, I think, first of all, if you look at China's economic prosperity and China's development in the past 30 years, they all just achieved with America's regional security supremacy. So for that point, I really don't think that'll be a big challenge for China. We have to overcome, for example, America's online system. So if the past 30 years is very telling, then we can really not just live in peace with the U.S., but also getting some sort of accustomed to each other. But the key challenge is whether China is getting bigger. U.S. strategic shift is truly just going more broader. So now the pivoting Asia policy, yes, is turning on China and hardening some sort of such a military encirclement. I can't agree with Mr. Ambassador more. I think the U.S. policy, even the pivoting Asia policy, is package of policy components. Someone is engaging China, someone is, reinforce the military presence. But for Chinese, it's really, really hard to draw a clear-cut line between containing China or hating China. On the other hand, if you hear a lot of such unfriendly rhetoric and some sort of such an interest group driven, the China factor exploitation, that trend remains very worrisome. So then, yes, from China's perspective, we would like to take the Americans' hand very tightly, boosting mil-mil relations.
Here endeth part 2 of the Intelligence Squared debate. The US alliance is Australia's best defence.